Charity is the cruelest word we own. It lets the giver feel holy, while it teaches the one who kneels for it exactly how little she is worth. When Lynette Fenwick was turned out into the snow with nothing to her name, but the name itself, a thing no one in the town would say aloud, she had already made her peace with the quiet death the poor are permitted. She did not expect a black carriage to stop for her. She did not expect a duke to look at her ruin and offer her a crown. The port of Weymouth sat at the cold northern edge of the country, where the land gave up its green and surrendered to slate and salt and a sea the color of old iron. Snow had been falling since noon, fine and mean, the kind that did not soften the world so much as bury it. Lynette stood in the mouth of an alley off the fish quay, her back to the wind, and counted her assets the way her father had once taught her to count a merchant's stock. She had one pair of boots, both soles worn through at the ball of the foot. She had a shawl that had been good wool once and was now mostly the memory of wool. She had a folded paper in her bodice that she could not sell and could not burn, and she had, by her own reckoning, 2 days left in her before the cold or the hunger settled the matter. She was 23 years old, though the woman selling roasted chestnuts on the corner had that morning called her mother, and Lynette had not corrected her. 6 months earlier she had possessed rather more. A narrow house above her father's counting rooms, a bed with a coverlet. A name, Fenwick, that the tradesmen of Weymouth had spoken with a small bow, because Josiah Fenwick kept honest books and lent fair and never once, in 30 years, dunned a widow before Lady Day. Then her father had died in his chair with the ledger open on his knees, and within a fortnight the world had discovered that honest books can still show a ruinous total. The house was not his. The counting rooms were not his. The debts, it emerged, were entirely his, and they landed on Lynette like slates off a roof. She had not wept. Weeping, she had decided long ago, was a currency, and she was too poor to spend it on men who had already taken everything else. She had sold the coverlet and the bed and her mother's ring and her own good dress, and she had gone looking for honest work, and she had learned the second cruel lesson of her new life. A woman alone with an educated hand and a head for figures is not a treasure to the men who might employ her. She is a temptation or a threat or a joke, and sometimes she is all three before noon. There had been offers, of course. There are always offers for a young woman with a straight back and nothing left to lose, and they were always the same offer wearing a different hat. A ship's chandler had suggested she might keep his books by day and his company by night, and had looked wounded when she declined, as though she had broken a contract he had drawn up entirely in his own head. A parish overseer had explained very kindly that the workhouse would take her, and had explained rather less kindly what the workhouse would take from her in exchange. A woman who ran a certain house near the customs stairs had pressed a warm meat pie into her hands one bad evening, and said only, without cruelty, that the door was open when the cold grew worse than the shame. Lynette had eaten the pie. She had not gone through the door. Not yet. That, she understood, was the whole of her fortune now, the closing gap between not yet and at last, and it was narrowing at the exact speed of the falling snow. She had kept the paper, though. The paper was the one thing she would not let go, because the paper was the truth, and the truth was the only property the world had not yet managed to strip from her. A gull screamed somewhere over the black water. Lynette pressed deeper into the alley and did the sum again, because sums were the one prayer that had never yet lied to her. 2 days, perhaps 3 if the frost broke. She was not frightened exactly. She had passed through fright some weeks ago and come out the far side into a cold, clear country where the arithmetic simply was what it was. It was then that she noticed the carriage. It had been sitting at the top of the quay for some time. She understood this, the way one suddenly understands that a sound has been going on for minutes. It was a good carriage, black and unmarked, the horses blanketed against the snow, the driver a still dark shape on the box with his collar up, no crest on the door, no footman calling a name. Only the two lamps burning steady in the murk, and the sense, unmistakable and unwelcome, of being looked at. Lynette read a street as she read a column of figures. A good carriage in a poor place at night meant one of a small number of things, and none of them had ever, in her experience, been kind to a woman standing alone. She turned up the alley to put a wall between herself and those two patient lamps. The carriage moved, not fast. It did not lunge or clatter. It simply rolled forward along the quay, unhurried, matching her, the way a man matches a step he does not wish to seem to be following. Her heart began a slow, hard knocking against the paper in her bodice. She walked faster. The snow ate her footsteps. Behind her, the wheels turned over the cobbles with a sound like something patiently chewing. At the head of the alley the way forked, and both forks were dark, and she stopped, because a hunted thing that runs blind into the dark is simply saving its hunter the trouble of the chase. She turned instead. She set her ruined boots square in the snow and lifted her chin and made herself look at the thing that was following her, because if she was to be taken, she would at least be taken, with her eyes open. The carriage drew level. It stopped. For a long moment nothing happened at all, only the snow falling through the lamplight and the sea breathing against the harbor wall. Then the door opened from the inside, and a man's voice, low and worn and entirely unhurried, came out of the dark of the carriage. "Miss Fenwick," it said, "not a question. You will die in that alley tonight, and I have driven a very long way to prevent it. Get in, and I will tell you why." Lynette did not get in. She stood in the falling snow, one hand pressed flat to the paper in her bodice, looked at the black square of the open door and said, in a voice she was pleased to find did not shake, "A man who knows my name in the dark is not offering me my life, sir. He is offering me a price." I have found the two are very often confused. There was a silence from inside the carriage. Then, astonishingly, a short, rough sound that might, in a warmer man, have been a laugh. "Sensible," said the voice. "Stay out of the carriage, then, if it eases you. But you will freeze while you decide. And I will not have your death on my conscience along with the rest. There is a rug on this seat. Catch." Something heavy and soft struck her in the chest. She caught it against her will. It was a traveling rug of thick gray wool, still warm from the body of whoever had sat under it, and the animal heat of it went through her ruined shawl and into her bones, and very nearly broke her. There in the snow, in a way no cruelty had managed in 6 months. "My name is Ravensholm," the voice went on, as if he had not just handed a starving woman the first kindness she had felt in months. "You may have heard it. Most people up here say it the way they say the name of a bad winter. My carriage will take you to my house, an hour along the coast and a great deal warmer than this. You will be given a room, a fire, a bath, and a supper you do not have to earn on your back. In the morning, if you wish to leave, my carriage will bring you back to this spot with £5 in your hand and no questions asked, ever. A night indoors, your freedom in the morning, and everything else can wait until you are warm." £5. Lynette's clever, exhausted mind turned the figure over. £5 was passage south to a city that had never heard the name Fenwick. £5 was, quite simply, her life bought back from the arithmetic of the alley. And no man on this earth gave a ruined woman that sum, and her freedom for nothing. "You have not told me what you want," she said. "No," the Duke agreed, "I have not, because if I tell you while you are half dead in the snow, you will say yes out of fear, and I have no more stomach for a yes that is really only fear. Come and be warm. Refuse me in the morning if you like. On a full stomach and in a dry gown, having lost nothing but a night. It is, I think you will find, the best offer you have had in some time. It was. That was the terrible part. The man knew it and had said so plainly. And a life of being lied to had left her strangely unable to resist plainness. She wrapped the rug around her shoulders. She did not get into the carriage. She walked to the driver and said, "I will ride on the box if your master permits, where the town can see me, and remember my face if I am not seen again." From inside the carriage came that rough sound once more. "Permitted," said the Duke. "Give the lady your second coat, and see she does not fall. If she dies of cold up there, out of suspicion of me, I shall look a greater fool than I already am." Linnet rode an hour through the snow on the box of a duke's carriage, wrapped in a driver's spare coat that smelled of leather and horse, the black cliffs on her left and the blacker sea on her right, and she did not once let go of the paper in her bodice. The house, when it came, did not reassure her. Ravensholm Hall stood alone on a headland where the land ran out into the sea, a great gray pile older than Manners, its back to the country and its face set against the water as though it had quarreled with the world and meant to hold the grudge another 300 years. Half the windows were dark. Ivy had swallowed the eastern wing. It was not the house of a man who cared what visitors thought, and it occurred to Linnet, climbing stiff from the box, that this was itself a kind of honesty, and that she had begun, dangerously, to be reassured by honesty where she could least afford it. The great door opened before she reached it. A butler stood in the gap, tall and spare and gray, with a face that had been informed of everything and approved of none of it. He looked at her ruined boots, at the driver's coat about her shoulders, and last and longest at her face. "Miss Fenwick," he said, and stood aside. "His Grace instructs me to say that you are a guest, and that a guest in this house is under no obligation whatsoever save one." Behind her, out of the dark, she heard the carriage door open at last and the slow, uneven sound of a tall man climbing down onto the gravel. "And what obligation is that?" Linnet asked, not turning round, "that I am under before I have so much as crossed the threshold?" It was not the butler who answered. The voice came from close behind her now, out of the snow and the dark, and for the first time it had a face coming toward it. "To tell me the truth," said the Duke of Ravensholm, "when I ask you for it, turn around, Miss Fenwick. It seems cowardly to keep bargaining with you from inside a carriage." She turned around. She had built the Duke in her mind across an hour of snow, as one builds a creditor before a meeting, and she had built him wrong. She had expected the fat, powdered sort of nobleman who bought women the way he bought horses and grew bored of both. The man coming across the gravel was none of that. He was perhaps 35, and he moved with a slight hard hitch in his left side, an old hurt worn into the habit of the body, so that he came at her out of the dark at a kind of deliberate slant. He was dark and unshaven and plainly dressed, no jewels, no lace, a heavy coat gone gray at the seams. His face was all difficult angles, a jaw like a closed door, and his eyes, when the light from the hall fell across them, were a pale washed gray, the exact color of the sea he had built his house to quarrel with. He did not look like a man who bought women. He looked like a man who had not slept properly in years and had stopped expecting to. He stopped a careful distance from her. Not close. She noticed that he kept the distance on purpose, the way a man keeps his hands visible around a frightened animal, and she resented, fiercely, how much she noticed it. "You wanted my face," he said. "Here it is. Now come inside before my butler freezes to death out of loyalty." Inside, the hall swallowed them into warmth. Linnet had not been truly warm in so long that the first touch of it was almost pain, a fierce prickling in her hands and her feet as the blood remembered what it was for. A fire the size of a small cottage burned in a hearth at the far end. There were no gilt mirrors, no delicate French chairs, none of the fragile, expensive things she had braced herself to feel unworthy among. The house was all dark wood and worn stone and books, a great many books, stacked in places shelves had given up. It was a house that had stopped performing for anyone. She understood the feeling. A stern woman was summoned, a Mrs. Sowerby, who took one look at Linnet and pronounced, to no one, that the girl would have a bath and a supper and a bed, and could be interrogated by his grace when she was fit to be seen and not before. Lynette opened her mouth to say that she preferred to have whatever was coming to her now on her own 2 feet, and the Duke said mildly, "Let her feed you first, Miss Fenwick. I have found that a starving person and a fed person are 2 entirely different negotiators, and I would rather bargain with the second." So she was fed. She was bathed in water so hot it undid something in her chest, dressed in a plain warm gown that fit ill and felt like armor, given bread and hot meat and a soup with real marrow in it, and she ate all of it with a slow, ferocious dignity, and did not cry and kept, throughout the folded paper pressed now inside the borrowed gown against her skin. It was near midnight when Mrs. Sowerby led her to the study door and left her there. The Duke was at a wide table strewn with papers, not behind it but beside it, in a chair pulled close to the fire, his bad legs stretched out toward the heat. He did not rise, which she was obscurely grateful for since rising plainly cost him something. He gestured to the chair opposite its twin, already turned toward the warmth as though her sitting in it had been decided some time ago. "Sit," he said, and then, catching himself, "Please." She sat. For a moment he only looked at her, and she made herself be looked at without flinching, and the fire snapped between them and the sea beat the cliffs far below like a slow drum. "You have been trying all evening," he said at last, "to find the price. You have decided I want you for my bed, and you have decided you will pay it if you must, because a warm bed with a devil in it is still warmer than that alley. Stop. I will tell you the truth now, because you are warm and fed, and you can hear it clearly, and because I promised your obligation in this house was to hear it. Ready?" "I have been ready," Lynette said, "for 6 months." Something moved across his hard face. There and gone. That might have been respect. "I did not come to Weymouth by accident," he said. "I came looking for a particular kind of woman, and I made inquiries, and every road ran to the same alley and the same name. A gentlewoman, educated, ruined, alone, clever with figures, too proud to beg and too honest to lie, which the whole town agreed had cost her dearly. Josiah Fenwick's girl. They spoke of you, Miss Fenwick, as of a scandal in a waste. I heard a woman I had a use for." "A use," she repeated, and her voice was very steady, and under the borrowed gown, her heart struck the paper like a fist. "I am not a marrying man," the Duke of Ravensholm said. "I have reasons, and they are old, and they are mine, and I will not lay them at your feet tonight to buy your pity, because your pity is worth more than that, and so, I begin to suspect, are you. But my reasons no longer matter against a colder fact, which is this: I must have a wife before the spring, a real one, a lawful one, a duchess this county will be forced to stand up and bow to. I must have her quickly, and I must have her cleverer than the pack of them, and I would greatly prefer, God help me, to have one who understands that this is a bargain, and not a fairy story, so that neither of us is disappointed later by the wrong dream." He leaned forward, the firelight cutting his difficult face into planes of gold and shadow, and he said it, then, the thing she would turn over in her mind for the rest of her life, the thing that would, before it was finished, shock a great many people who thought they knew exactly how the world was arranged. "So here it is plainly the way you have earned. You need a home, and I need a duchess." The fire cracked. The sea struck the cliff. Lynette Fenwick sat very still in the warm and the light, with the truth pressed against her skin under a stranger's gown, and looked at the impossible man who had just, in 8 quiet words, offered to make a ruined nobody into the one thing, no creditor and no gossip. And she opened her mouth to answer him. What she said was, "No." The word dropped into the warm room and sat there. The Duke did not flinch, but something behind the gray eyes sharpened, as a man sharpens when a game he had expected to be dull turns interesting. "No," he repeated. "Not no forever," Lynette said. "No to the shape of it. You have offered me a home, as though a home and a cage were the same thing so long as the fire is good. I have been offered a warm room with the price sewn into the mattress before, your grace, more than once these 6 months. I have learned to read the price before I read the room. And what? Said the Duke. Do you read here? I do not know yet, that is the difficulty. So, I will not say yes to a house I have not surveyed, or to a bargain I have not written half of. If you want a duchess who is cleverer than the pack of them, your grace, then you will have to suffer a woman who negotiates. You cannot have the wit without the nerve. They come sewn to the same spine. For a long moment he only looked at her. Then he reached out, took a fresh sheet from the strewn table, uncapped an inkwell, and slid both across the wood toward her. Write your half then, he said. Let us see the spine. One question first, she said, while questions are still permitted. Is there a woman with a prior claim on the name you are offering me? A wife you have hidden, a betrothed thrown over, a girl in the village with a child, and your gray eyes. I have been the one left standing in the cold, your grace. I will not build my one safe house on the grave of another woman who was. Something crossed his face, quick and complicated, and for a moment she thought he would refuse. Then he said, very low, there is no wife, no betrothed, no child of mine anywhere on this earth, and that I can swear on whatever book you please. What there is the door you may not open, and that is an older grief, and it does not touch your claim on me by a farthing. So she wrote. Her hand, when it moved, was quick and fine and educated. The hand of a woman who had kept real books, and she felt his eyes follow it, and she did not let it shake. She wrote that the marriage would be true and lawful, and binding, a thing no court and no cousin and no whisper could ever unmake, because she had lived once already on the far side of a document that other people could tear up, and she would not do it twice. She wrote that a sum would be settled on her in her own name, hers, absolutely beyond his reach, and beyond any creditors, so that whatever became of them, she would never again stand in an alley counting the days she had left. She wrote that between the two of them there would be no lies, since neither of them, she suspected, had the patience left for them. She turned the sheet around and pushed it back to him. He read it slowly. When he had finished, he did not laugh, or scold, or haggle. He took up the pen and signed his name beneath hers, the letters black and driven hard into the paper, and the plainness of it undid her more than any speech could have done. No one had signed a promise to Linnet Fenwick in a very long time. Now mine, he said. His half was shorter. He wrote that she should have the run of his house, his name, his money, and his honesty upon every subject in the world, save two. There was a door at the end of the north gallery in the old east wing that she was never to open. And there was one question she was never to ask him, which was why he must marry before the spring or be undone. Agree to those two silences, he wrote, and everything else he owned was hers to audit down to the last farthing. Linnet looked at the two silences sitting on the page. You understand, she said, that a woman told she may go anywhere, but one room will think of nothing else for the rest of her life. I'm counting on your being cleverer than that, the Duke said. A fool wants the locked door because it is locked. A clever woman leaves it locked because she has understood that some doors are load-bearing and that pulling on them brings the roof down on the innocent along with the guilty. I am asking you to be clever, Miss Fenwick. It is, after all, why I came looking for you. She thought of the alley and the 2 days she had counted and the door near the customs stair she had not gone through. She thought of a sum settled in her own name, beyond the reach of every man who had ever tried to price her. She took the pen. She signed. Then we are agreed, he said, and for one moment the exhaustion lifted from his face and she saw underneath the ghost of a much younger man, one who had perhaps once believed the world could be bargained with fairly. Mrs. Sowerby will show you a proper room. Sleep, Miss Fenwick. You have driven a very hard bargain, and you look ready to fall out of your chair. She slept that night, in a real bed for the first time in half a year, in a cold, high room above the sea, and she did not dream, and she woke in the deep of the night, for no reason she could name. The house was silent. The sea was silent, the tide gone out, and into that silence, from somewhere down the black length of the sleeping house, from the direction of the old east wing and the door she had promised never to open, came a sound. It was soft. It was rhythmic. It was unmistakably the sound of a living thing, and it stopped the instant she sat up to listen, the way a sound stops when whatever makes it has heard you first. She sat very still, holding her breath, counting her heartbeats the way she counted everything, and waited for it to come again. It did not, but the silence afterward was not the flat silence of an empty house. It was the held breath of one. An empty wing does not do that. She did not go to the door. She had signed her name beneath the promise, and a woman who breaks her word on the first night has nothing left to sell for the rest of her life. But she lay awake a long while in the cold, listening to a silence that now had a shape in it, and she understood that she had married into a house with a secret at its heart, and that her husband-to-be had told her as much to her face and made her sign her agreement to it in ink. She was, she decided, exactly the sort of woman who could live with that. For now, the days that followed arranged themselves with a speed that would have frightened a softer woman. A special license was sent for and came back from the south with unnerving promptness, which told her something of the reach that name still had. A dressmaker was brought up from the town, blinking, to be told that the future Duchess required 3 gowns of good plain cloth and nothing in the way of lace, and went away convinced the North had at last driven the Duke entirely mad. The house itself was slower to make up its mind about her. Mrs. Sowerby thawed by degrees, the way old iron thaws, first leaving a covered warming pan at the foot of Linnet's bed without a word said, then correcting her sharply when she tried to carry her own coal. Alden began to say Miss Fenwick, in the particular tone a good butler keeps for the people he has privately decided to keep. It was not affection. It was the thing the destitute learn to prize. Above affection, acceptance offered without terms. Linnet, meanwhile, discovered that she could not stop herself doing the one thing she had always done, which was to put a disordered set of books in order. It began as a courtesy and became a compulsion. The Duke's affairs, spread across the wide table in the rooms beyond, were not merely neglected. They were a wound that had been left to fester. Rents uncollected, a mill sold 2 winters past for 1/3 of its worth. 2 farms let go to a buyer whose name appeared nowhere she could find it. Loans that a prudent man would have carried for years called in early and paid off in a panic, at a loss again and again, as though someone somewhere kept a hand at the Duke's throat and squeezed a little whenever he began to breathe. She tested the thought, the way she tested everything, by trying to prove it wrong. She pulled the dates. She laid the sales and the called loans out in a line by the month they had fallen, and the line did not scatter the way honest misfortune scatters. It clustered. Every blow had landed in the weeks just after a good harvest or a lucky sale, at the precise moments the estate had begun, however faintly, to recover. Bad luck does not wait politely for a man to stand up before it knocks him down again. Only a person does that. A person watching, choosing his moment, enjoying it. She sat very still over the pages one gray afternoon, and the numbers slotted into place in her mind as they always had, cold and clear. And what they spelled was not neglect at all. It was a siege. Someone had spent years, patiently and expensively, closing a fist around Ravensholm, buying its debts, starving its income, waiting. And a man being strangled slowly by money would need, before the spring, one thing above all others that money alone could not buy him quickly. He would need a marriage, a lawful one, a duchess. She did not have the whole of it, but she had the shape, and it explained a great deal about a man who had driven through the snow to a fish quay to find a wife nobody could take from him. "You have gone pale," said the Duke from the doorway. She had not heard him come. He leaned on the frame, favoring the bad leg, and behind him hovered Alden with a tray. "Alden, put it down before she faints into my accounts and ruins the only competent handwriting in the building." "I do not faint," Linnet said. "No," he agreed, lowering himself into the chair across from her with the care of a man folding something that hurts. "I begin to think you do very little that other women do. You have found something. You have the look my old colonel used to get before he told me the bridge was mined." She hesitated. There would be no lies. She had written that with her own hand. So she told him the truth, or the shape of it. Laying the pages between them, the mill and the farms and the strangled loans, tracing the single closing hand behind them all. She stopped short of the one question she had promised not to ask. She did not need to. It was written all over the man's tired face. "You see it," he said quietly. It was not quite a question. "I see that someone wants this house," Linnet said, "and has been very patient about taking it, and that you have found a way to spoil their patience, and that I am the way." She met his eyes. "I am not offended, Your Grace. A weapon that resents being useful is simply a bad weapon. I only prefer to know which end of me is pointed at whom." Something happened to his face then that she had not seen before. It was not the ghost of the young man. It was the living man here and now, looking at her as though she were the first genuinely good news to enter the house in years. "I chose better than I knew," he said, low almost to himself. "You say that," Linnet said, "as though choosing me were something you did. You threw a drowning woman a rope with a knot already tied in it. Do not mistake good aim for good fortune." "I never mistake anything for fortune," the Duke said. "Fortune is only the name lazy men give a pattern they could not be troubled to read. You, of all people, should know that." And there it was, again, the flicker at the corner of his hard mouth that never became a smile and was worth a great deal more than one. Before she could decide what to do with that, Alden reappeared in the doorway, and his careful face had changed, and in his hand was a single letter. "For Miss Fenwick," the butler said. "Delivered by hand." The boy who brought it would not stay to say from where. Linnet took it. The direction on the front was written in no hand she knew, but no one alive knew she was at Ravensholm. She had told no soul in the town. And yet here was her own name, Miss Linnet Fenwick, on a letter that had found its way across the snow to a door at the end of the world. She broke the seal. The words inside were few, and they were meant for a woman who was supposed no longer to matter to anyone. "I know what your father kept back. I know the room you now sleep in. Burn the thing you carry, and you will never hear from me again. Peebit. And I will come to Ravensholm and take it out of your hands myself before the spring." Linnet did not scream, or drop the letter, or reach for the paper pressed even now against her skin. She had spent 6 months learning that the body's first honest impulse is almost always the one that gets a woman ruined, and she had trained herself out of it. She read the words a second time, folded the letter along its crease, and set it flat on the table where the Duke could see it. "No lies," she said. "You had best read this. It concerns the shape of things you cannot see yet." He read it. She watched the color go out of his knuckles where his hand gripped the arm of the chair, and she understood that whatever this was, it touched his siege and her secret both, and that the two had been the same thing all along, only neither of them had yet been able to prove it. "The thing you carry," he said. He did not ask what it was. He had bought 2 silences, and he would not break the price by demanding a third thing for free, and she found she respected him for it even now. "When the time is right," Linnet said, "I will tell you what it is, freely, because I choose to and not because a letter frightened me into it. Not before." "Good," the Duke said, and meant it. The rumor reached the county before the marriage did. The Duke of Ravensholm, grim recluse of the cliffs, was to marry, not a lady, not an heiress, a ruined nobody, dragged out of a Weymouth gutter, a moneylender's bankrupt daughter, with an educated hand and no character to speak of, The gossip did not know whether to be scandalized or delighted, and so in the manner of gossip everywhere, it was both at once and thoroughly. Linnet felt the change without leaving the house. A neighboring lady sent a card, and then, learning the particulars, sent a servant to fetch it back, which Linnet thought showed real dedication to the art of the insult. A parson wrote to the Duke to remind him with many soft words of the gravity of a marriage undertaken in unequal circumstances. The Duke used the letter to light his pipe. "You might have answered him," Linnet observed. A duke's silence in the face of a parson is read for 3 counties in every direction. "Let it be read," he said. A man who explains himself to the people who have already hanged him in their minds is only teaching his own executioner to tie a neater knot. We will answer every one of them at once, on the day, in a church, with your name and mine written together in the register. That is the one sentence in the language they cannot misquote. And then, on a hard, bright morning, with the sea flashing like beaten tin below the cliffs, a stranger's gig came up the long drive, and Mr. Craik arrived. He was a neat, dry, ageless man in black, the sort of man who might have been 40 or 60 and had clearly decided the distinction was beneath him. He carried a soft leather case. He smiled when Alden showed him in, and the smile had the particular quality of a drawer sliding shut. He did not look like a threat. He looked like a clause in a contract that a tired man signs without reading, and Linnet, who had learned the hard way what such clauses cost, disliked him on sight and with her whole heart. "Miss Fenwick," he said, bowing to precisely the depth owed to a person of no importance. "And how very well you look, considering. One does hear such distressing things. A father's debts, the workhouse so narrowly avoided. It would move a stone." He settled himself uninvited. "I represent a client, a man of considerable patience and, I am afraid, considerable reach. He has taken an interest in this house for some years, and now, most regrettably, an interest in you. Then he is a man of poor judgment," Linnet said, "for there is nothing in me worth the price of your journey." "Ah, but there is." Craik's eyes moved, just once to the front of her plain gown, where a folded thing might sit against a woman's skin, and Linnet felt the blood go cold in her hands. "There is a small paper. Your late father, God rest his honest soul, was too honest for his own health. He wrote down a thing he should have burned. My client would like it burned. Now in exchange he is prepared to be generous. Leave this house. Give up this frankly absurd marriage. Hand over what you carry, and my client will settle upon you a sum that would let a sensible woman live very far away for a long and quiet life." "And if the woman is not sensible?" Linnet asked. The drawer of the smile slid shut a little further. "Then she marries a bankrupt duke in a crumbling house, and she learns that my client's patience, which has waited years for this estate, will not be spoiled at the last by a shivering girl and a scrap of paper. One way or another, Miss Fenwick, he will have what is his by the spring. You may be paid, or you may be simply removed. He truly does not mind which." Linnet stood. She was aware distantly of the Duke in the doorway, arrived silent on his uneven steps, saying nothing, letting her hold her own ground because he had understood already that she would not thank him for snatching it from her. That silence was its own kind of shield, and she loved him for it a little, which was inconvenient. "You may tell your client," she said, "that I have read better threats than yours from better men, in colder rooms, with less to lose. My father was honest, as you say. It killed him. But the honest thing he wrote down did not die with him, and it is not for sale, and it will not burn. Sat. Now take your soft little case out of this house before I have it counted for stolen spoons." Craik rose entirely unoffended, and that was the worst of it. He had not come to win. He had come to measure. He bowed again, exactly as low as before, and at the door he paused and looked back, and his ageless face was quite pleasant. "My client is patient, your grace. he said to the Duke, though his eyes stayed on Linnet. But patience is only the polite name for a debt that is still gathering interest. I will call again in the spring. Do try to still be here. The days that followed were a strange, taut peace, the kind that settles over a house, that knows the storm has only gone round to come, added from the other side. The banns were dispensed with. The wedding was set for the last day of winter, and Linnet understood, without being told, that the marriage and the reckoning Craik had promised for the spring were bound together by a thread she could not yet see the whole of. She worked. He worked. They took their meals together and argued companionably about interest and drainage and cattle prices. And twice she caught him watching her across the table with an expression that had nothing to do with ledgers, and twice he looked away first, which she found she minded. She had come to Ravensholm braced for a transaction, ready to be a duchess as she had once been a bookkeeper, precisely and without illusion. She had not reckoned on a man who bought silence from the whole world and never once tried to buy it from her. She had survived by refusing to hope, and now hope was creeping into her accounts like an error she could not find and did not, if she was honest, much want to. And in the deep of the night, the sound behind the door in the east wing came again. It was music. She understood now. A few thin silvery bars, the voice of some old music box wound by a careful hand. It would play its little phrase, 6 notes, perhaps 8, and then stop as though the hand that turned it could not bear to let the tune reach its end, over and over, the beginning of a song that was never allowed to finish. She lay and listened to it, and did not go to the door, and something in her chest ached in a way that had no name. The crack came on the worst night of the winter. The storm rolled in off the sea near midnight, a great shouldering brute of a thing that made the old house groan on its bones. Linnet woke to shouting, not the wind. A man's voice, raw and wordless, from the direction of the Duke's rooms, and under it the frightened murmur of Mrs. Sowerby, and the thud of Alden's tread. She was in the corridor before she had decided to move, a shawl over her nightgown, and pushed into his room past a white-faced maid to find the Duke fighting a war that had ended years ago. He was on the floor beside the bed, tangled in a sheet, his shirt soaked through, his eyes open and seeing nothing in the room at all. The old wound in his side had broken its long truce, a splinter of French iron shifting at last against the nerve, and the pain had dragged him down into the worst night of his life. He was speaking. A name over and over, and it was not a name she knew. Verena, Verena, run, get her out, get her out. The house is coming down. Mrs. Sowerby was weeping quietly and uselessly. Neither of them knew what to do with a man who had gone somewhere they could not follow, because neither had ever been anywhere so cold themselves. She had. Out, Linnet said. Both of you. Bring hot water and clean linen and the brandy, and then leave us. He will not want witnesses to this, and I will not give him any. They went. She knelt down into the wreckage of him. She did not touch him, at first, because she had learned in a colder school than theirs that a drowning man will pull his rescuer under if she comes at him wrong. She simply put herself where his blind eyes were pointed and spoke, low and even, in the voice she had once used on herself through the long alley nights to keep from screaming. The house is not coming down, she said. The war is over. You came home. You are lying on your own floor in Ravensholm, and there is a storm off the sea, and it is only weather. Verena is safe. I do not know who she is, but I know she is safe, because a man does not fight this hard for the debt. And, come back now, come back, she kept talking. She did not tell him it would be all right, because it would not, and he would have heard the lie. She told him instead the small true things, that the fire was lit, that the wound was old and had healed wrong, and was lying to him now about how much danger he was in, that she had counted the beams in the ceiling above his bed, and there were 14, and every one was sound. She fed him facts where a gentler woman might have fed him comfort, having learned in her own dark that facts are the only rope that holds when everything softer has rotted through. It took a long time. She did not hurry it. When at last the sense came back into the gray eyes and found her kneeling there close, her hand now flat and warm against the center of his heaving chest, he went very still. She did not let go. She had knelt like this once, in spirit, on the floor of a life as ruined as his, with no one to talk her back from the edge, and had promised herself then that if she ever clawed her way into the warm, she would not leave another soul to cross that dark alone. She was keeping a promise made long ago to a starving girl in an alley. "You are not supposed to see this," he said. His voice was wrecked. "I have seen worse. I have been worse." She did not take her hand away. "You said a name." He closed his eyes. For a moment she thought he would take shelter behind one of his two purchased silences, and she would have let him. Instead he said quietly, into the dark, "My sister. She is not dead either, whatever the county believes." His hand came up and covered hers where it lay on his chest, not to move it, only to hold it there. "Her name is Verena, and you have heard her music every night since you came, and been kind enough to pretend you had not kissed her," said a voice from the doorway. It was a woman's voice, soft and strange and very calm, and they both turned. A woman stood in the open door in a white nightgown, her fair hair loose to her waist, her feet bare on the cold stone. She was perhaps 30, and she had the Duke's gray eyes exactly, and she was holding, cradled against her like an infant, a small tarnished music box. She was thin as a person becomes who has forgotten that meals are events and not mere interruptions, and there was a stillness about her that was not peace, but its opposite. The practiced stillness of a creature that learned the world hurts less if you do not move inside it. But she was real and alive, and here in a house that had told the county she was 11 years in the ground, she looked at Lynette with mild, remote curiosity, as one looks at weather. "You let the tune finish," Verena said to no one. "Someone has finally let the tune finish. I heard it all the way down." Verena would not stay long in the room. She drifted when Mrs. Ponus. Sowerby came for her, as biddably as a child, pausing only at the threshold to look back at Lynette with those uncanny gray eyes. "You are the one who counts things," she said. "In the night, I hear you thinking. It is a very tidy sound." And then she was gone, and the little unfinished phrase of music started up again far down the gallery, and the Duke of Ravensholm, propped now against the side of his bed with the brandy Lynette had made him drink, told her the rest. He told it flatly, the way she had learned people tell the things that have cost them the most, with all the feeling filed off so the words could be got out at all. His elder brother had been the heir and had died of a fever the same winter their father died, so that the title and the ruin came down together onto Kester, 3 counties away at the time, learning to walk again on a leg the surgeons had wanted to take. And in the years before all that, when the family was whole and rich and careless, a man had come courting his sister Verena, a charming man, a man of business and ambition and beautiful manners. "Sir Gideon Voss," Kester said, and Lynette felt the name go through her like cold water, though she could not yet have said why Voss had wanted the connection, the old name, the doors it opened. Verena had loved him. And then their father's attorney had come to the old Duke, with a gray face and a terrible discovery, that a codicil had appeared among the estate papers, beautifully done, naming Sir Gideon Voss as heir to the Ravensholm lands should the succession ever fail, and that the codicil was a forgery, and a good one, but a forgery. "My father confronted him," Kester said, quietly to spare Verena, and Voss, seeing the marriage and the money slip from him at once, did a thing so cold that I have never stopped being certain of it. He set out to ruin her, deliberately and completely, her name and her hopes and her every future all at once, and made sure she knew he had done it on purpose, so that the last thing her reason held before it let go was that the man she had loved had planned her destruction the way a man plans a business. She has been, as you saw, her ever since, 11 years. Linnet thought of a fair woman drifting down a dark gallery, letting a tune play its first few notes and never its last, night after night for 11 years, and understood the little unfinished song at last. Some cruelties do not kill. They only teach a person to stop, forever, one note short of the end of everything, so that nothing can be completed, and nothing can ever again be taken in the completing. The fire cracked. The storm leaned on the house. "He is the one strangling the estate," Linnet said. It was not a question. The siege, the mill, the strangled loans. He wants the lands the forged codicil gives him. He only needs the marriage to fail. He needs you unwed by the spring. He has waited 11 years for a recluse to die a bachelor, Kester said. He did not reckon on my being spiteful enough to marry out of pure hatred of him. Which is why, Miss Fenwick, I drove through the snow to find a woman he could not frighten, could not bribe, and could not touch, because she had already lost everything he might have threatened her with. And there, Linnet began quietly to laugh, and the laugh had tears in it, because the world had just performed a trick so cruel and so perfect that only the truth could have arranged it. "Say the attorney's name," she said. "The one who found the forgery. The honest one who would not be bought." Kester frowned. "A man of business in the South Fenwick, Josiah Fenn." He stopped. Linnet reached into the neck of her gown and drew out, for the first time in front of any living soul, the folded paper she had carried out of the alley and through the snow and into his house, and had guarded against her own skin like the last coal of a dead fire. "My father did not merely find the forgery," she said. "He kept the proof of it, the genuine instrument, and his own sworn hand recording how the false one was made and by whom. Voss ruined him for it, the way he ruined your sister, patiently and completely. And it killed my father, and I have carried the reason why against my heart for 6 months without knowing it was the same reason that brought you to me." Her voice shook and she let it. "You went looking for a woman Voss could not touch. He made me. He made us both. And I am holding the one thing on this earth that can burn him to the ground." For a long moment neither of them breathed. The stakes had turned entirely over in the space of a sentence. They were no longer two frightened people trying to survive until a wedding. They were the only two people alive who together held all of Sir Gideon Voss in their hands. Then, from the black drive below the storm-lashed windows, came a sound that did not belong to the weather. The crunch of many wheels on gravel, the stamp and blow of tired horses driven hard through a winter night. Kester dragged himself to the window. Linnet was already there. Below, through the sleet, lamps were coming up the long drive. A whole cold procession of them. "That is not Craik," Kester said softly. "Craik sends letters. This is the man himself." They received him in the great hall, because Linnet would not have him in any room where they lived, and because a hall with a fire the size of a cottage, and every sconce lit, was the only stage grand enough for the performance she intended to give. Sir Gideon Voss came in out of the storm-shaking water from a caped greatcoat, and he was nothing like Craik. Craik was a drawer sliding shut. Voss was the whole cabinet. He was tall and perhaps 50, silver at the temples, with a warm, open, likable face and eyes like 2 chips of river ice, and he smiled at the Duke of Ravensholm with the genuine pleasure of a man greeting an old and worthy opponent. Every villain Linnet had built in her mind across her hard 6 months had worn its cruelty plainly in a sneer or a grasping hand or the flat eyes of a parish overseer. She had never met the other kind, the kind that is charming and genuinely amused, that likes you and unmakes you in the same warm breath and feels no contradiction in it, having never truly believed other people to be quite as real as itself. Watching Sir Gideon Voss warm his hands at her fire, she knew this was the most dangerous creature she had ever stood in a room with, and that he did not think himself dangerous at all. He thought himself reasonable. That was the whole of the horror of him. "Ravensholm, you look unwell, and this must be the famous Miss Fenwick, snatched from the gutter to spite an old man's patience." He bowed, beautifully. I confess I did not believe it when Craig told me. A money-lender's bankrupt daughter. You always did have a soldier's taste for the reckless gesture. You are in my house, Voss, Kester said. He was upright by main force, one hand white on the back of a chair, and only Linnet, close beside him, could see what it cost. State your business, and take your smell out of it. My business. Voss warmed his hand to the fire, entirely at his ease. My business is mercy. Oddly enough, I have come to offer it in person because I am fond of a clean ending. In 4 days you turn 36 unmarried, and the estate passes to me, as your late father and his wisdom arranged. The lie was told so smoothly, so warmly, that Linnet understood how a whole family had once loved this man. You look at me as though I were a monster, Voss said with every sign of mild hurt. I am nothing so interesting. I am only a man born with nothing, who decided very young that nothing was intolerable to remain. Your father faced the same choice, Duchess. When the world offered him a fortune to look away from a single sheet of paper, he was fool enough to refuse. I was wise enough, long before, to accept. He died in a cold room over his honest books. I mean to die very old and very warm. Forgive me if I decline to be lectured on which of us chose better. You mean to cheat that with a wedding. A wedding to a woman with no name and no character, which the courts will pick apart for a year while I bleed you white. Or, he turned the warm face on Linnet. The girl can give me the paper her fool of a father died clutching, and go, with more money than she has ever seen, and I will leave you your crumbling rock and your broken sister, and trouble you no further. I am tired. 11 years is a long patience. I would like to go home. You forged the codicil, Linnet said. Prove it, said Voss pleasantly. My father did. And she watched the warmth go out of those eyes, just for an instant, the first honest thing his face had done since he entered, and she knew then that Kester had been right about all of it for 11 years. Voss recovered in a breath. He smiled again, and this time the smile reached its true depth, the coldest thing Linnet had ever seen on a human face. Do you know, he said gently, what happens to a paper when the only witness to its truth is a bankrupt's daughter who lived 6 months one step from the gutter? Nothing. It is her word, and she has none. But say the court indulges you, and you drag it all into the light, the forgery, the old scandal, the how and the why. He turned, unhurried, toward the dark mouth of the corridor that led to the east wing, and raised his voice, just slightly, so it carried. Then, the whole of it comes out, including her, poor broken Verena, who must be produced and examined and pitied and explained. I've already sworn the information. A commission of lunacy, the moment this touches a courtroom. Physicians I've chosen will decide whether your sister is fit to be at large, and they will decide she is not, and I will be standing by, so grieved, so ready to take the poor creature into proper care. The fire roared. No one spoke. Say her name, Kester said. He had not moved from the chair he gripped, but something had come into his ruined face, and Linnet knew she was watching a man reach at last the far wall of a patience he had kept, for his sister's sake, 11 years. You have named my father and named this estate. Say, Verena, say her name, and tell me to my face she was a fair price for a sheet of forged paper. Voss looked for the first time not afraid, but faintly and genuinely puzzled, as though a chair had spoken. She was collateral, Ravensholm, he said. I do not trouble to remember the names of collateral. And that, Linnet thought, watching her husband-to-be go white, was the truest and most damning thing the man had said all night. So there is your choice, Voss said, drawing his greatcoat back around him, for he had known before he came that he had already won. Burn me with your paper, and you burn your sister with it, and I will have her under my roof by summer, which we all understand is what I have truly wanted these 11 years. or hand me the paper. Keep your sister safe, and lose only the house. You cannot save the estate and the girl both. I have built it, so you cannot." He bowed once more to Linnet, with terrible courtesy. "Do think it over. You have 4 days. I have found that 4 days is exactly long enough for clever people to talk themselves into the sensible thing." Linnet felt the whole shape of it close over them like cold water. It was not even greed any longer. What Voss wanted was the last unbroken thing in a family that had once dared to catch him out, and he had arranged the world so that their own decency would be the hand that gave it to him. He had not left them a clean choice. He had left them 2 kinds of ruin, and the freedom to choose which to carry. "You have made one small error," Linnet said, as he turned for the door. Voss paused, courteous, interested. "You keep calling us clever. Clever people do the sensible thing, and I never have. I am something more inconvenient to a man like you. I am stubborn. I have nothing left to lose, and my father taught me exactly how to read a forged hand." Voss smiled, entirely unbothered, and inclined his head as though she had paid a compliment he was long owed. He walked out into the storm as calmly as he had come, the lamps of his procession dwindling down the drive, and the great hall left ringing with the sighs of the trap. Linnet stood staring into the fire with the paper cold in her hand. Beside her, Kester had begun very slightly to shake, and she did not think it was the wound. "He is right," Kester said, and his voice was ash. "I have turned it over 1,000 ways in 11 years, and never once found the road that saves them both. I did not find it when it was only my sister. I will not find it now." And far down the black corridor, soft under the noise of the storm, the little music box began again. 6 notes. 8. The beginning of a song that was never, ever allowed to reach its end. Linnet did not sleep. She sat by the dying fire with her father's paper on her knee and did the only thing she had ever truly known how to do, which was to look at an impossible account until it confessed where it had been balanced wrong. Voss had built the trap around a single certainty, that the 2 of them would do what decent people do, which is to protect the weakest thing in the house at any cost, even the cost of themselves. He had made Verena the price of victory, because he knew they would not pay it. He had known Kester for 11 years. He had measured Linnet through Crake in an afternoon. He had built a perfect machine out of their goodness, which meant the machine had a flaw, and the flaw was that he had never once asked Verena what she wanted. She went, in the gray before dawn, down the forbidden corridor, and this time no one had made her promise not to, and she opened the door at the end of the north gallery. The room beyond was not a cell. It was warm and full of books and had a window on the sea, and Verena was awake, sitting in the light of a single candle with the music box in her lap, and she looked up at Linnet without any surprise at all. "You have come to ask me a question no one has asked me in 11 years, Verena said, in her soft, remote voice. "I know. I have been waiting. I am not as far away as they think, you know. I only found it easier to be far away. It hurt less. Out here." She turned the little key. 6 notes. 8. Her hand stopped as it always stopped. "He told you he would have me declared unfit, and put me away, and that you must give up the paper to spare me." "Yes?" Linnet knelt by her chair, as she had knelt by Kester on that terrible night, and she told the truth because she had promised a man there would be no lies between the people she loved, and she found the promise had quietly spread to cover his sister too. "Yes," she said. Verena was quiet a long moment. Then she did a thing she had not done in 11 years. She turned the little key, and this time she did not stop her hand, and the small tarnished box played its silvery tune all the way to the end, the whole song, sweet and complete and unbearably brief, and in the silence, after it, she smiled. And it was a terrible and beautiful smile, entirely sane. "Then we will not spare me," Verena said. "I am so tired of being spared. Let him bring his physicians. Let him produce me. And I will stand up in front of the whole grinning county, and I will tell them, in my own voice, In words of my own choosing, exactly what Sir Gideon Voss did to a girl of 19 who loved him, and we will see what they dare to call that woman then. Her gray eyes, so like her brother's, were bright and wet and fierce. He built his cage out of my silence, so I will simply stop being silent. It is the one weapon he never armored against, because he never once imagined I might want to use it. Linnet found she could not speak. "Do not look at me like that," Verena said, almost gently. "You gave me back the end of the song. It is only fair I give you back the end of yours." Kester found them there when the sun came up, the two women and the finished music, and Linnet stood and put her father's paper into his hands and told him what his sister had chosen, and she watched 11 years of a particular grief crack and fall away from his face. But there was still the other thing, the thing that had been sitting in Linnet's chest since Voss had named it in the hall, and she made herself say it while she still had the nerve, because she had promised no lies, and the worst lies are the ones we tell by keeping quiet. "You should know," she said, "that when I marry you in 4 days, I will be giving you the one thing you actually needed all along, which was never a wife. It was this paper. You needed the woman who happened to be carrying it. I have spent my whole life being wanted for my use. Kester, my hand at the books, my head for figures, the thing sewn into my bodice. I need to hear you say once, out loud, whether you are marrying the paper or the woman, because I find I can survive almost anything except not knowing." He was quiet for so long that her heart began its old hard knocking. Then he crossed the room, and he did not kneel, because his leg would not permit it, and because neither of them had ever had any use for theater, and he took her ink-stained hands in his scarred ones. "I chose you in an alley," he said, "months before I knew your father had ever held a pen. I chose you because you told the Duke to his face that you would freeze on his steps out of sheer suspicion of him. Linnet, if you handed me that paper and I found it was blank, if it saved nothing and no one, and cost me this house and every acre and the roof over my sister's head, I would take you down to that drafty little church all the same, and count myself the luckiest ruined man in England." He lifted her hands and pressed his mouth to the ink on her knuckles. "Burn the paper if you doubt me. I will marry you in the ashes. I do not need a duchess. God help me. I have discovered I only need you." Outside, the storm had finally blown itself out, and somewhere beyond the cliffs, the first hard light of the last 4 days of winter was coming up cold and clear over a sea gone suddenly still. They were married on the last morning of winter, and they did it, at Linnet's insistence, in the most public manner the North could provide. Not in the drafty little church on the estate, hidden from the world. In the great gray minster in the county town, with the doors thrown open, and word sent ahead to every gossip and magistrate and titled busybody who had spent the winter feasting on the scandal of the grim Duke and his gutter bride. Linnet had understood, in the gray dawn with the finished music still in her ears, the one thing Voss in all his cleverness had got wrong. He had built his whole machine in the dark, because men like Voss only ever work in the dark. So they would beat him in the light, in front of everyone, where the dark could not help him. She did not wear white. She wore deep gray silk the color of a winter sea, and she carried her father's paper in her hand instead of flowers, and she walked up the aisle of a church packed to its cold stone rafters with people who had come to laugh on the arm of Alden, who wept the entire way and pretended fiercely that he did not. Verena walked behind her, unhidden, in the light. Steady. The vows were quick and plain. When the old minster clock struck the hour that made Kester 36, a lawful married man in the Ravensholm land safe from the forged codicil by the genuine condition of his father's true will, a sound went through the crowd like wind through corn, because half of them had come precisely to watch that hour pass him by. And then, before they could rise from the scandal into mere disappointment, Linnet turned, still holding her husband's hand, and faced the packed and staring church, and she was no longer a bankrupt's daughter, that any man could call a liar. She was the Duchess of Ravensholm, and her word, by the oldest and cruelest arithmetic of that world, now weighed exactly as much as the coronet on her head. "Since you have all come so far to see us," she said, and her clear, cold voice carried to the last pew, "let me give you something worth the journey." She told them everything. Sir Gideon Voss was in the church. Of course he was. He had come to watch his 11-year patient's pay, sleek and warm and smiling in a front pew, and Linnet watched the smile curdle by degrees as she laid it all out in the plain, merciless language of a woman who had kept honest books. She did not raise her voice. A raised voice, she knew, is only the sound of a person who expects not to be believed, and she intended to be believed. She spoke as she added a column of figures, one plain fact after another, until the total simply stood there, and no one in the room could make it come out otherwise. The forged codicil. Her father's proof, held up now in her hand for the bishop and 2 magistrates who sat, by no accident at all, in the 3rd row. The siege of the estate, and then when Voss surged to his feet with the old warm charm cracking into something uglier, crying out that this was the raving of a ruined household, that no court would ever take the word of a fallen woman and a broken one. Verena rose from her seat, and the church went utterly silent. She was not raving. She stood straight and pale and lucid in the gray light, and in her own soft voice, in words of her own choosing, she told a silent minster full of the very people who had shunned her exactly what Sir Gideon Voss had done to a girl of 19 who had loved him. She did not weep. She did not falter. She simply told the truth from beginning to end, and let the whole tune play out. And when she had finished, there was not a soul in that church who could believe her, the broken creature Voss had painted, and not a soul who could look at Voss and call him anything but what he was. The county had come to enjoy a spectacle, at the expense of 2 ruined women. They found instead that they had been made witnesses, and there is nothing a crowd forgives less than being shown, in broad daylight, the very thing it had been comfortably pretending not to see. The mood in the church turned like a tide going out, all at once, against the smiling man in the front pew. It was Craik who put the last nail in. He had come to measure, and had spent the winter measuring. And now, seeing exactly which way this would fall, he rose and quietly informed the magistrates that his late client's papers were of course entirely at the court's disposal, that he himself had always harbored the gravest private doubts. A drawer sliding open at last to save its own hinges. Sir Gideon Voss did not leave that church a free man. The whole cruel machine he had built in the dark for 11 years came apart in a single hour of light, exactly as Linnet had reckoned it would, because the one force he had never learned to forge or bribe or frighten was a room full of witnesses who had finally been given something true to look at. The county had come to watch a ruined nobody, laughed out of a marriage. They went home having watched her walk out of that minster a duchess, with a broken sister restored to the daylight on one side of her, and a duke who could not stop looking at her on the other, and the man who had ruled their winter with his patient cruelty led away to answer for all of it, at last. Shock, it turned out, was too small a word for what she left behind her in that church. Spring came late to that coast as it always did, and then all at once, the way a held breath is finally let go. The frost drew back off the headland. The unkempt gardens below the east wing, left to the wind for 11 years, threw up a reckless, tangled riot of green, and Verena took to walking in them each morning. Further, every day, the tarnished music box left behind now on a sunny sill, where it played its whole small song to anyone who wound it. She was not cured. There is no cure for what was done to her, and Linnet never once pretended there was, but she was in the daylight, and she was safe, and she was among people who let her be exactly as far away or as near as she wished, and some mornings, Linnet noticed, she was very near indeed, and laughing. There were bad days still, Days when the far-off look came down over Verena like weather, and she kept to her room, its door open, now always open, and let the tune play and did not speak. But they grew fewer as the light grew longer, and on the good days she began, shyly, to take up small things, the ordering of the flowers, the naming of the new pups. 100 tiny sovereignties a person must be let to reclaim one at a time. Linnet never hurried her. She, of all people, knew a life is rebuilt as a ledger is balanced, a single honest entry at a time. The estate began, slowly, to breathe. Linnet went through it column by column, and with Voss's fist prized off its throat, the numbers began, for the first time in a decade, to tell the truth and to tell it kindly. Rents came in. A mill was bought back. She was. The tenants agreed with the North's grudging highest praise, a hard woman and a fair one, which was precisely what the place had needed. She was at the great oak desk one bright afternoon, her father's paper long since lodged safe with the court, and a copy framed at Kester's insistence on the study wall, where he could see it when her husband came in from the boundary with mud on his boots and sea wind in his dark hair and stood behind her chair. "You are working," he said, "on our wedding anniversary. We have been married 11 weeks. That is not an anniversary. That is a woman keeping accounts." "I am a duke," Kester said, against her hair, his arms coming around her warm and certain, in a way they had not been on the night she met him. "I am permitted to invent anniversaries whenever I find my wife too far away across a desk." She let the pen fall. She leaned back into him, and outside the window Verena was laughing at something in the wild green garden, and the sea for once was quiet, and Linnet Fenwick, who had once counted the 2 days she had left to live in a freezing alley, sat still and let herself be held, which was a skill she was learning late and gladly. Mrs. Sowerby had unbent so far as to bake, on Sundays, a seed cake nobody had asked for and everybody devoured. The dogs were too fat, the fires were always lit. It was not the life she had bargained for on a snowbound night with a paper held against her heart. It was better than any bargain, being the one thing that cannot be written into a contract or signed for in ink, the ordinary, daily, unremarkable safety of being wanted for no reason at all. Charity is the cruelest word we own. She had known that all her life. It lets the giver feel holy, while the one who kneels for it learns exactly how little she is worth. A man had come out of the dark that winter and never once offered her charity. He had offered her a bargain, honestly, as one equal to another, and somewhere in the honest keeping of it, the bargain had quietly turned into the only thing that had ever been worth more than the arithmetic. End quote. He had said, on the worst night of her life, that he needed a Duchess. He had been wrong, and so had she, and it had taken a forged will and a broken sister and a house under siege to teach them both what they had actually needed, which was, against every sensible expectation, only each other. She thought of the black carriage on the fish quay. She thought of the warm rug thrown out of the dark and the crown she had been sure was a trap. Then she turned in her husband's arms and kissed him, and decided that the trap had been the best thing that ever happened to her.